the system.
Okay, we have to go live, Nick. So
Right.
I just got a little notification that Facebook requires us to go live, so we are live. So Nick, Chris, welcome to my live show every Wednesday. I'm just fascinated by solar, and you guys have taught me so much. We've started this group conversation for 3-4 weeks now. And I'm just learning and applying BI to understand the market of these, the solar world. And it's just fascinating. I am learning so much, and we're going to go over some of those stories. And I think, Chris, you and I are already talking about a second session because I think there's going to be a lot to learn and a lot to talk about here. So I just want to go into quick introductions. So Chris, I've known, boy, I don't know. It's probably been 20 years. And we had worked at Delphi Automotive on satellite radio. So he and I are both familiar with things streaming out of the atmosphere to Earth. so maybe you can give us a little bit of history on your background and especially with engineering and electronics and how you got into solar.
Sure. Electronics, obviously, with an electrical engineering degree and having worked in automotive electronics for so long, my partner and I, we kind of accidentally discovered that we were both looking in a renewable energy direction. Back at the time of the big collapse, well, how do we phrase these now? One of our most recent economic catastrophes in 2008. When at that time, both of our parents were living on fixed incomes, and we were looking at ways that we could offload their cash outlay. And one thing we hit on immediately was looking at what do we do about their energy costs. Electrically, when we realized all the hardware out there, we were looking at a lot of DC electronics. And if you've got a lot of automotive design, you've been doing DC electronics for a long time. So that was kind of our gateway into solar from a technology standpoint. And from there, that was back in, like I said, 2008. And we've come a long way from then, and we're a lot more sophisticated now. It takes an awful lot more than just understanding DC electronics to deal with solar and to be good at it. So that's, in a nutshell, our background. Uh-oh.
Charles, did we lose you?
Maybe so.
I think we did.
This is only a partly live stream.
1/3 dead, 2/3 alive. There's hope. Yeah, these numbers, as you know, Charles, are all over the place. I mean, from the Northeast, and so much of the power there, residential, is in the 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour, because so much of it's nuclear generated. And we did the switch again here. We just stay on this, right?
I think so. It looks like we are still streaming, even though the mastermind.
Yeah, I'm surprised because clearly I'm the weakest link. I mean, technologically I'm pretty weak, very weak.
Well, what was your background?
I'm a physician. I have been in medicine for about 46 years now, mostly anesthesia, and the last 7-8 years, something like that, occupational med. And the last year, pretty much occupational med whenever they need me. I'm just sort of the fifth wheel. A friend of mine owns the business, so he has 3 OcMed clinics, 2 in Grand Rapids and 1 in Holland, Michigan. So it's basically musculoskeletal problems, a lot of testing, drug. There we go.
Yeah.
I was just saying to Charles, I'm the weakest link in this technological adventure, and the last one I expected to lose was you.
Well, I had to switch to my phone's data connection because so we had that storm blow through the other day.
Right.
And it knocked everything out, and my internet was out for a little while, and the speeds aren't quite back, and the setup's not quite back yet. So sorry about that. Jumped off for a second there. So I'm gonna tee this off on a conversation, and then we'll start Nick off too on his adventure and how he ended up in solar. But Nick, I think you have a little bit of that story where you were commercial fishing or fishing for lobster.
Again, I'm different. I'm a different animal, and I enjoy being that. And for some reason, I've cheated death again. I've survived till almost my 75th birthday. Yeah, I was in medical school, and that's a drag after a long time. After you take all you both are electrical engineers. It's not an easy slug. And I said, I've had enough tests and all this sort of stuff, so I'm going to do something different. So I was a commercial fisherman out of Boston, Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Martha's Vineyard. And as I moved from lobsters, which are day trippers, I moved to the bigger boats, which went 200 miles offshore for the Sea of Maine and George's Bank. But I still had a degree in medicine, and I knew reality had to strike one of these days. And so I said, okay, enough is enough. You got to cycle back into life before you start your internship. So I took some courses, or I sat in a lot of courses at Mass General, then did my internship, then I did my residency at Boston University. And I was always fascinated by solar. I think just like Charles's, just like Chris's. But it was more on the dream side of the equation. So I started Power by Sun about 1984, 85. I met Stanford Ovshinsky, who was the inventor of amorphous silicon solar cells, nickel metal hydride batteries, truly, and many more things than that. And that sort of hooked me into solar. And I was the second distributor in the world of his United Solar thin film amorphous on stainless steel. You're probably familiar with that, Chris, are you not?
Yeah, Unisolar, yeah.
Unisolar, I mean, phenomenal product. A little low on the percent efficiencies, but phenomenal, flexible, non-destructible. Matter of fact, some of the systems we put up 20, 21 years ago are still working just fine. And anesthesia, and I'll be real brief on the medical part. Anesthesia is boredom interspersed by moments of stark terror. And that definition is true. All right. So I knew as I was gravitating to my older age, I had to get at it. So I lasted till about 52, 53. No lawsuits or anything. So I figured, okay, quit while you're ahead, buddy. Just like the Aruzioni, for the national hockey team, the Olympic hockey team. Why did you quit? He said, I'm quitting while I'm ahead. It doesn't get any better. And then I was fortunate to have met some wonderful people. So most of the systems that I did were not real world systems. They were demonstration systems. Peter Wege of Steelcase was a dear friend of mine. So he would say, Nick, I want you to do this. So we did a number of systems, but there was no competitive bidding. So when you get out into the real world, Chris, which I have an enormous amount of respect for what you're doing, I realized I'm not really prepared for this. So I knew that in my age. I said that's why I was fortunate enough to have met Peter Roll Klein, and it's been a nice relationship since then. So he knows much, much, much more about the business. And then I'll end with this one thing. In medical school, how many business courses they give you? 0. And that's why doctors are terrible, terrible business people. But even with that criteria, I did start Power by Sun, which is mostly now hooked in with energy conservation source. I bring a project and we work out a commission. And I did start Harding Energy, which is the battery company. That is
I want to bring that up.
Very quite viable. And that's been a struggle, but it's very viable. So I think that's about it, unless you want to draw out something else of my past.
I think,
what's that? I lost your voice. Chris, do you have a voice?
I think I do. We've lost Charles's audio, though. Oh, but he
Charles,
can hear us.
that must have been one heck of a lightning strike. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe we can hit it here.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yep.
good.
Welcome back.
I'm having all kinds of trouble.
That must have been a heck of a lightning strike. Although they said the winds in Iowa were 106 miles per hour.
Well, I don't know. I can't explain the audio part, but so Nick, tell us a little bit about your battery company, because I think that led you down this path a little bit, because you were an anesthesiologist, you had done some lobster fishing, now you got a battery company, which kind of put you in the power track, right? So
yeah. Again, doctors are dumb as pipes, right? So we got a bunch of guys. What I saw, having known Stan Oshinsky, he was the inventor of the nickel metal hydride battery, which, by the way, is still very, very, very viable in the world. Toyota, a lot of their Priuses are still nickel metal hydride. Their hydrogen fuel cell car, the Mirai, that's a nickel metal hydride battery. And the thing that I like the most is their Corolla gas electric hybrid 2020, 53 miles per gallon. That's less than $23,000. That is not a lithium ion battery. That's nickel metal hydride battery.
Oh, really?
Yep. So that hasn't gone away. So I go back to the statement that I said before, without having any business courses, doctors are the dumbest business people in the world. We had no idea what we were getting into. But sometimes that's a good thing. If you knew all the problems, you'd never get into it. So we were actually making batteries in Muskegon, Michigan. And of course, Japan and China were making batteries at a third of the cost because they were making bazillions of batteries. So then we realized we had to back off that scenario. So we worked with the larger battery companies using their batteries. And we're more of a battery designer, battery packer. Batteries, as you all know, are dumb. You have to make them smart, the way you charge them, the way you discharge them for the particular application. And the reason I saw it, so being in anesthesia, you got battery backup in the operating room. You got battery backup in the recovery room. You have battery backup on the stuff that you bring into the helicopter or to the ambulance. There's batteries all over the place. Pulse oximeters, EKG monitors, you name it, they've got batteries. So I figured, well, as it turned out to be, further down the road, like 30 years down the road, who's our biggest customer? Medical device companies. Stryker, Massimo, there's a whole list of them. And that's worked out real good because you have to jump through a lot more hoops in the battery industry if it's tagged a medical device. So for some reason we did that, and everything seems to be working out okay. But it's been on the edge for a long time. It was in the intensive care unit. We got it out of the intensive. We got back into the intensive care. We discharged it from the hospital, ended back in the intensive care. Don't start. Point of the story: don't start a battery company from scratch.
Well, I wanted to extract that from you, Nick, because you have background in energy and power. So I wanted to extract that. That's kind of the route you took, which is I thought it was fascinating.
Don't forget now, folks.
Yeah.
I'm talking to 2 electrical engineers, so that sort of puts me out of the picture. Now, to compensate for that, I do have a son. He is a PhD in electrical engineering, computer science from MIT. So he works now at Amazon. So when I really get stuck, he explains it to me. I say, look, Joe, don't give me all the formulas. I don't understand what you're talking about. So,
well, very cool. Thank you, Dick. So,
thank you.
We are in this part of the.
I'm going to switch it back. So we're going to have some people who watch this later on, and they're going to come from potentially commercial backgrounds or residential backgrounds, and they're going to. One of the things that always comes up is cost, right? And we just had this conversation right before this. But one of the interesting things that I learned from you is the cost that, let's say, a commercial or industrial business buys at, or maybe kind of a distributor or a person that buys it and resells, kind of a co-op you were saying. So can you guys kind of talk a little bit about that, what the cost points are and where solar sits? And even though it's cheaper, why, I think you talked a little bit about it earlier, Chris, is there's an initial upfront investment that has to be recouped. So even though you're getting the power at cheaper, it might take a few years to get it back. And then we'll take this conversation and lead into some of the grants that you guys have taught me about. You know, there's some federal tax credits, and the REAP grants, I think, are some of the big ones. But maybe we start out with that conversation, Chris, is, you know, if you're brand new to this, like me, so I didn't know, I didn't know to look at my power. I didn't know what I was buying my energy at. What are some of the price points for energy?
Oh my. We kind of said this offline as we were getting ready to start the stream. They're all over the map.
Yep.
A
Agreed.
lot depends on where you are, who your utility is, what their power sources are. I'm in Indiana, Nick is in Michigan, and we have 30 or 40% difference in what our customer base is paying for their electricity.
Interesting.
So when we're trying to sell the value of creating your own energy, that value inherently is quantified by what now do I not have to spend, and that is all driven by what are their rates. Not all driven, but it's really the rates mean a lot. Now, the one thing is that rates keep going up, right? So commercially, what did we say the range is between us, Nick? It was like probably between 8 and 12 cents a kilowatt hour, roughly.
Yeah, right.
Is a reasonable what we can assume our commercial customers are paying. Ours will be more on the low end of that scale than
Correct.
Okay, and then for residential, what's a typical? So that's commercial. That'd be like a business, a manufacturing facility. 8 to 10 years. You're thinking
8 to 10, 8 to 12. Yes.
Okay, and then what have you seen?
I'd say more on the 10, 8 to 10.
And then for residential, what are you guys? Kind of if I was to look at my power bill, what's a typical range for residential?
Yeah, you are probably up in your neck of the woods, paying 15, 16 cents a kilowatt hour.
Correct.
In northern Indiana, it might be 13 cents. Down where I am, it's like 11 cents. Southern Indiana, it's much like Michigan. So there's again a little bit of a spectrum there. And if you're talking about a co-op, like a rural energy co-op, it's probably less than that. It's probably several in our area are under 10 cents a kilowatt hour.
Wow. And then
if you look back there's reasoning for that. So many of the power plants in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky are along the Ohio River, and that's how the coal barges come in. So Indiana's got a lot of coal power. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Charles. Ohio, I think, has a lot of coal power, and Kentucky, I think, has a lot of coal power. So, and like I say, they're along the river, which affords them cooling and barging of the substrate coal. The trouble with Michigan is it's not an island, but it's a pretty big peninsula. And I don't know what the shoreline is in Michigan, but it's about 3,000 miles, 2,000 miles, 3,000 miles. So the feeders that come in have to come across the Great Lakes or from the lower part of it, so that we don't have the choices Indiana has. We don't have the massive river with all the massive power plants, and we don't have the transmission lines that Indiana has.
Oh, so that's why Indiana is typically cheaper, is they have the access, the rivers, the coal, which is a little bit cheaper, and the closer you are to the source of the energy, the less it takes to transmit, whereas Michigan doesn't have some of the and then barges. Interesting, fascinating. And then you mentioned solar. So we're talking, I think you said 15 for residential, maybe around the 10, 12 for industrial. And then you install a solar panel. What can you expect a typical, cost to be for solar?
Go ahead, Charles. You give a number, and I'll try to.
Well, Chris.
Chris, I'm sorry, Chris.
We are seeing if I asked Nick beforehand what the denominator is, because I've got a pile of numbers here, and I can make that number mean
exactly.
Right. So we will generally choose to stretch our calculations out over either 20 or 25 years. The reason being that most of the hardware has a 25-year production warranty on it. And when you're figuring out that business case, you probably ought to factor in you're going to replace your inverters somewhere over that 25-year life, because electronics don't last as long as the solar collectors.
Yeah.
So generally, we see that unsubsidized as we're in the 7 to 9 cents, I think, the last time I looked, a kilowatt hour.
Unsubsidized 7 to 9. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
Interesting.
is that
And then
where you are, Nick?
Yeah, again, we don't go quite as far as, but you're right, as far as replacing electronics, which we have to do, but I haven't myself put that into the long range.
gotcha. So
But
that's
you
interesting.
do get the 25% year warranty from the manufacturer of the solar cells, 20 to 25 years.
So that's interesting because it's a long-term calculation, but you got a time
Right.
limit on the material. There's an investment, and so this cost that you're saying takes into account that investment, Chris, in all the panels and the inverters and everything.
Yes. Yeah. The way that's done is you take your upfront cost, you take your cost that you're offsetting.
Yeah.
No, you don't talk the offset yet. You just take your upfront cost and then you put in the production equation. You have to, if you're going to do it accurately, you have to degrade your system a small amount every year. So every year, given identical conditions, it will produce just slightly less material. And then you factor that total amount of energy made over your initial investment, and you get $1 per kilowatt.
Gotcha. Interesting. Can I ask you? So you throw out a lot of terms, and maybe somebody like me that's newer, it's like, whoa, the collector, is that the panels, and what are the biggest cost drivers in equipment, right? So I'm imagining if somebody from the outside was like, well, you see the panels themselves, I'm thinking that's a big factor in the cost. There's the mounting hardware, that's probably a big factor in the cost. The inverters, I think that just converts so the sun's rays come in and you're converting it into DC power. Is that correct?
Correct.
With inverters.
No, you're taking DC and you're converting it to AC.
Okay.
For the power for the house.
So the DC, so the power comes in at it's not variable frequency, so it's coming in at a constant
Correct.
DC. You're collecting it, you're converting it on an inverter, and then typically, and then there's a battery bank to store it in case, so you build up a buffer. Is that correct? Or what are the typical cost drivers, and what do you do about storage?
Well, a system can be done just direct grid intertie without batteries, or no grid at all, solar to batteries, so you're autonomous. And that has to be sized for days of no sun. Or you can have a mix of the grid, solar, and batteries. They're all different variables.
And what's typically installed for a residential? What kind of setup is typical for residential? Do you typically do batteries, or is it pretty much a straight?
Now, again, I'm not the expert, Chris, that you are, but usually it's grid intertie without batteries, because you're adding to the cost with the batteries.
Grid intertie without batteries is that is the baseline system.
Right.
That's where the one starts. That's the one where you can actually make a business case for it.
Right.
As soon as I add storage, if that storage is there for emergency backup power in the event of a grid loss, you have to ask a question like, well, what's my payback on that? Well, what's your payback on your life insurance?
Yeah.
It's really difficult to quantify for backup reasons. In fact, you can't quantify an actual payback. You're buying a capability. You're not investing in payback at that point.
And so have you installed more backup systems and rechargeable more on the commercial side where, there could, that's more of a concern probably, right, is potential downtime? Or
we actually, and I'm curious what you see, Nick, but we see commercially almost exclusively grid interactive. And for a few reasons, but for us, the kind of the size systems that we hit in the 100 to 500 kilowatts, that's a tough range to get cost-effective battery hardware, because on the market you'll see residential scaled product, and then you'll see Tesla's semi-trailer battery units at a utility center to replace gas peaker plants. There's the market for commercial is still really settling out.
Interesting.
Payback on that stuff is pretty tough.
Right. So
you also have to use the risk reward ratio. You use the financial ratio. The risk reward, batteries are the weakest link of the system. Batteries fail. Solar cells, I don't think I've ever seen a solar cell fail. Have you, Chris? They break every once in a while. Something hits them, you replace it. But the actual technology failing, I don't think I've ever seen a solar cell fail.
Charles, you saw my most recent failure, right? And that was John Deere induced. It was not. It was not
John Deere.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up. So you posted a picture, and there was a solar panel with a big kind of a bend in the bottom. So this was a ground mounted in a field next to, I think there was a hog facility next to it, right? And a John Deere had come and kind of, they were mowing. Were they mowing? I think they were mowing the grass, and so we gave John Deere a point, and the solar panel lost a point on that one. So one of the dangers is John Deere.
Yeah. Yes. Any equipment that you would use, really. We have one at a small college north of here, and I replaced one of those panels for them last year. It's in a field behind dormitories, and I'm positive that they were using that as an obstacle for a driving range.
Oh, wow.
You just have a perfect golf ball sized impact point that shattered glass. So yeah, it's generally an unnatural occurrence that kills these things.
So that's not a carbon footprint, that's a golf ball footprint.
Yeah, so you got to watch out for John Deere, golf balls hit by college students. And I think you were telling me the other day too, there's coating. Every once in a while you might have to clean it because some of the fans were blowing and some dust was getting on panels. And so there's that side of things, which is kind of fascinated me, is you could get a coating right on your solar panels that could degrade the performance. So it kind of matters where you put it. If you have a dusty area, you could build up a whole layer of dust.
It's pretty much everywhere. We do a lot in rural settings for ag systems, and boy, in the spring there's planting, so everywhere you see the dust content in the air is very high, and then after that there's pollen season, and you don't see the pollen, but it will land on the glass, and then harvest dust in the fall, and for the livestock operations there's all kinds of particulate in the exhaust fans. But then we also had a system on a store right in the middle of town, and we went up there, and they're right on the main artery that goes from Holland, Michigan, where you are, down to Indianapolis, right? They're right on Route 31, and their panels were filthy, and it was particulate from rubber.
Rubber.
Rubber from all the traffic, so you get soot, tires wear out, and where they wind up wearing out is very small particulate, and it will land on stuff. So there's always something going to land on the glass. If you have regular rain, that's maybe not a big issue.
It washes it off. Yeah, so I'm going to jump into something kind of related to what you were telling me about, not on top of the panels, but under the panels. So now you've got a situation where you've installed panels and you want to inspect the underneath the panels, but let's say it's up on a roof, right? So Chris, I think you've addressed this issue, and I want you to talk a little, and then Nick, we're going to go to you about some of the marina installations, because I think that's fascinating too, in Michigan, because we have a lot of marinas. But Chris, so tell us a little story about, so you wanted to inspect underneath solar panels. They were up on a roof, and you solved that problem in a very unique and innovative way. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and the solution is we're still working on making it universal because there's a wide range of hardware designs that installers use to put arrays on rooftops.
Gotcha.
But especially for the residential market, the commercial industrial market, you tend to have people looking more closely because, I mean, you've got plant engineers, you've got maintenance crews, and so someone is going to be watching, hopefully, pretty closely. Residential, not so much. My good buddy and again a former coworker of ours from a decade or more ago, who runs the robotics company in town that markets to the U.S. first robotics leagues. He made a custom product for me that now I have a radio controlled robot with a video camera and a thermal camera, and I can crawl around and go look at every single connector under the array, and both look for hotspots and then make a visual assessment of whether or not the connection is still secure, and that's where most of the problems I'm going to be concerned about are, is in the wiring.
Yeah.
Hats off. That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal.
Yeah, so you can be on the ground, you're watching your controller, you're driving this little system, and it's small enough where it goes underneath the panels, and you've got a small amount of clearance, and it's going under, and it's got a couple of different cameras, a thermal imager you said too, right? And it's checking the connectors and the mounting and making sure everything is in good shape, which is, I thought it was a brilliant solution to that problem.
Brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yep. So when we have a demo, we should, on this show, we should drive it around on a roof. But Chris, I think you did some destructive testing too, right? Did you drive the robot off the roof once?
We did. And some of it was intentional, some of it was not. We wanted to see, we had a roof that was at a couple of different levels, and we definitely wanted to see how it would negotiate that. Because if you get two wheels accidentally, I mean, everyone has different gaming skills, and this is a radio control console, right? So it's like, all right, what if you're going to give it to me and I drive it off that section of the roof? And we kind of got it into a tumble, a very nice tumble, where it actually fell off the roof onto the ground and cartwheeled for quite some way. It survived just fine. It was all prototype wiring, and actually we wound up with a loose connector.
Oh wow! Because of that, so it survived.
The only damage, yeah.
Wow. Now, were you driving, Chris? That's a question.
I was not.
You were not. Okay.
Now, question: if it gets stuck up on the roof, do you draw straws? Who goes and gets it, or the one operating it?
We're going to say that's the operator's problem.
Yeah, right. Should be
the operator, the guy that got
operator error, right?
Yep. So Nick, I'm going to jump to you. So that was a great story, Chris. Thank you. I'm going to jump to you and talk a little bit about, because you and Peter did something fascinating, because you found a market niche in Michigan. And I read somewhere, I think the statistic is we have, I think, the fourth largest coastline, the state with the third or fourth largest. And a lot of people don't realize it, but it's called the Great Lakes. We're a peninsula basically jutting out into the Great Lakes. And so you found a perfect niche. And can you talk a little bit about that niche? And yeah.
And it brings a lot of different subjects. So we live not on the lake, but across the street from the lake. So there was always a marina. There's always been a marina at the end of our road, and then it's the Grand River. So they're the quickest access to the big lake. So I've been bugging this guy for years. Look, you need solar on your roof. You need solar on your roof, not only for the use of the slips, but he's at the end of the line. And years ago, I don't know, I think they bettered it now with the LEDs, but they were burning lights out all the time, the traditional Edison lights, because he's sucking up all this juice, and all these houses are upstream from him. And as a result, the voltage would drop and the lights would burn out prematurely. So I didn't use that argument. I just said, this is a good idea. You got the space and everything. Year after year after year, without a real good story, I have a good story, but I don't have the business case. Okay. And this guy was a very, very successful marina owner. It all changed when Peter Roll came into the equation. So this guy had been beating his brains out for years, never got to first base. Just, oh, it's a good idea, we'll consider it. But also during the period of time, the price of the systems kept going down. So that was, but in Peter's favor, he made the business case a lot stronger. And all of a sudden, he's done 2 projects and he's considering the 3rd project now. And obviously, they have the space. In the wintertime, when there's no solar fuel or minimal, the demand goes not to zero, but pretty close to zero. He's got all the spaces that boats plug in. And a lot of these big boats, they never leave the slip.
Mm.
That's their cottage. They come from St. Louis. They come from Chicago. They
Yeah.
come from all over the Midwest, and that's their cabin, so to speak. Expensive cabins.
Yeah.
And so they shore power, refrigeration, and entertainment and air conditioning. Okay.
Mm,
So
that would-
on the roof of the solar cells, he's using the power himself first before giving it up to the utility and paying 2 or 3 times more for it. But he's folding in the cost of the slip, the cost of electricity, but the general public doesn't know that. He's supplying energy for 4, pick a number, 3, 4, 5 cents. The general public looks at their electric bill at home and they think, wow, it's 15, 16 cents. So this slip cost is a good deal. And of course, they charge by the footage but they don't even figure it out. But he's making power considerably less, but incorporating that cost at considerably more into the slip cost.
Interesting.
So
And
that's
then-
it's a
Yeah, so the demand is high in the summer. You've
Correct.
got all these boats that are drawing power. It's better for the people down the road because he's not taking away and
Correct.
affecting their voltages. There's this huge unobstructed roof on top of the marina
and it's usually the storage. They put up these warehouses to store boats in the wintertime. Of course, in Florida, you don't do that. But in Michigan, Indiana, you do that.
Yeah.
So to own a boat in Michigan is really pretty stupid. But try to bang for your buck. But everybody, I don't, at one time it had more registered boats than any other state in the union because of not only the shorelines of the Great Lakes, but all the little lakes or the non-connected to the big lakes. There's lakes all over the place.
Wow. And that was so much underutilized space. We were talking about
Absolutely.
that. Wasted space, unobstructed, sunshine hitting it, and here you were able to put panels on top of it.
And there's no air conditioning units on the roof of these storage buildings because they're not air conditioned, but the boats are. So the power is delivered to where it's needed.
Interesting.
Seasonally adjusted for the maximum season. Yeah, it's really a lot of nice things. And the last building they did, the marina did, they put a new roof on, or the roof was a new building. So they incorporated the cost of the roof and the solar cells together and got the 20, whatever, what is it now, Chris? 26, 27% federal tax credit. And obviously the accountant of the marina said, you're stupid if you don't take advantage of this.
Yeah.
So it becomes, as so many things in life, it becomes a financial issue.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
The numbers are definitely positive for it.
Yeah. So that's a fascinating application, and I've learned from both of you. We're both in states that are heavy agriculture in the Midwest. There's I think turkey farms all over the place, and that's one opportunity is turkey farms. And I think Nick, you were telling me potentially that they can't be down, right? Because you got to get oxygen.
It's just like Chris said with the hog farmers. They pack these turkeys in these buildings way over. They're eating and they're producing the other end in a massive amounts. There's ammonia all over the place. You got it. That's poisoning them. Plus, not enough oxygen. They're crowded so closely together, and it's perfect. Chickens, turkeys, pigs, perfect.
Yeah, and I think Chris, you were at an application, and I think you had told me once there was 6 hours, right? That was the maximum downtime before they started losing the animals, right? Was it oxygen levels?
Correct. It was. It was. Let's just say air quality. The
Air quality, right. That brings in everything.
That would have been suffocation.
Right.
Wow, they were suffocating.
So if they lose power and they cannot run their ventilation,
right,
that's 6 hours before major loss.
Wow, and so you need to have power, that time, or get it back up, or it's catastrophic if you lose power to one of these farms. That's just incredible. And so I want to talk a little bit about the cost that always comes into, and Chris, you have a video about the REAP grants, I believe, right, on your website. And I, yep. Can you, and we'll go to you, Chris, and then maybe Nick, you can jump on. I think you had some thoughts too. We've been emailing back and forth, but I think, from some of our audience members in the future, they're going to watch this, and I think this would be an important part of the video. Is can you kind of lay out how the REAP grant works and how you handle it, and Nick, maybe how energy conservation source and how you've handled it too.
Sure.
And what it means to the end customer who it applies to.
So REAP stands for, I believe, Rural Energy for America program, and it's a USDA program, but it's aimed not just at farmers or people who make their living only on agriculture, but it's aimed really to benefit rural communities. So it's completely not residential. So farms and businesses in rural areas, and by rural I mean towns of less than 50,000.
Right.
Or not within a major metro area. I mean, you could get a town, you can get close enough, for instance, to Indianapolis or Grand Rapids, where even though you're not in the city, you're no longer rural. So they've got maps. You can go there and enter an address, and they can tell you whether or not you're in an area that applies.
Yeah.
The grant itself is good for up to 25% of project costs.
Okay.
And what we generally see are commercial applications where, when I take a federal tax credit that is for renewable energy of 26% this year, I take 25% potentially from a REAP grant, and then I depreciate the remains. I mean, that system payback is pretty rapid.
Wow.
So,
yeah, it's 100% depreciation in the first year.
Yeah. So
you put those three things together, boy, they're powerful.
So there's the federal tax credit, which is 26%. You've got a REAP grant that can cover another 26%. So you're looking at 50% of the costs up front. You've been helped. And then depreciation, you're offsetting taxes with depreciation of that capital asset.
100% the first year. So you don't have to wait for that depreciation.
Oh, really? Okay.
100%, right.
So payback is that, I mean, how many people know about it? Is that something you're still telling people about? Is, the REAP grant?
Chris, you're probably too, but from what little I've seen, and again, I'm sort of half in and half out. It's too bad that Peter isn't here because he's more into it than, but it's so piecemeal. People, I don't think the general public really understands it, number one, or number two, even knows about it. And that 50 less than 50,000 population, I mean, that brings in a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a lot of the surface area of the state. And I will say that in the ag community, those guys are very much in tune with USDA programs. So a lot of them know it exists. They don't necessarily know all the details.
Right.
The other thing, like any federal grant program, there's a price to be paid for paperwork. It is a not trivial paperwork program, so we generally pair interested clients with a grant writer, which is a fee, but it's definitely worth their time. Just because you're not a paperwork person, this can be totally outside the flow of what you normally do to run your business or your operation, and so it makes you real inefficient. The grant writer kind of earns their keep in that sense.
Interesting. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Chris, I've never done Peter has. I don't want to say it's boilerplate, but a lot of it's boilerplate, right?
It is boilerplate.
They know.
But a lot of it gets to financial data of the operation.
Right, right.
So it's not something that, as a service provider, that I don't know that I want to know all those financial details.
Right.
And some of my customers would feel much more comfortable with me not knowing those financial details.
Correct. I understand.
So, the grant writer, that's probably a good thing. We have had customers take that in-house.
Oh, really? Okay. They have grant writers that know the process. They'll take it in-house.
Or someone who will do what they say.
Yeah. Gotcha. Interesting.
And by and large, my exposure, family farm, some of the friends that I know that have farms, they're pretty acute people. They're pretty intelligent. They know what fiduciary responsibility is. If not, they fail, especially the small farm. So they're right on the edge of this stuff. They appreciate it.
Interesting. Now, so if you're a commercial business, let's say in a larger city, greater than 50,000, then the REAP doesn't apply, but the federal tax credit still applies?
Correct.
And is there any other type of credits that would apply to larger commercial business in a larger city?
Not in Indiana.
Okay. And I think, Nick, what was interesting was, at least there was an application, I think. There's some companies that are based in Europe, and because of is there some type of credit given? I think the European Union gives some type of credit if you reduce emissions, right? So we've seen kind of that indicator is some businesses that are owned by offshore by EU-owned businesses are getting, kind of encouragement or credits stateside.
They understand it better, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
But they're getting credits too, or benefits from their parent company. It's like, hey, the return period is 20 years, but we're going to allow you a shorter return period on this project because we're getting credits from the EU or whatever, right? So
right. Yeah, my understanding, now again, it's my understanding because I haven't run this through the process, but if it's a factory or if it's a business or if it's a footprint in the United States, but the company is based in Europe and they make the investment in the United States, I think they can get the European aspect of it too. I don't hold me to that.
Okay. Yep. No, that's an interesting influencer, I guess, to the business.
I can support that with data, Nick. I was working with an automotive company with headquarters in France.
Oh, gotcha.
Charles, in any Fortune 100 company, their capital investment payback time is typically like lightning fast, or they don't do it. They don't put money in it. But they assured me as we were looking at a plan that their normal, they got not only the project cleared, but kind of a directive from headquarters in France that they were given relief from their normal financial gates for that project. So someone had done other calculations. There was money elsewhere or benefit elsewhere that the local office didn't fully understand or see. And I think it was all about the EU headquarters giving them credit for it.
Sure.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, fascinating. So Chris and Nick, so we're at 50 minutes on our live broadcast. So that gives us about 10 minutes to do some closing, some fun remarks. I want to just bring this up. So if somebody was watching this in the future, and they wanted to contact you, right, about installing either solar on their home, on their, and I was kind of asking you about this in the emails, or if I had a business, go to your website, contact you, and then what are the first steps in the process? I think you had said if it was residential, or I talked to Peter about this. He said, typically you give me your power bill, and then you would take that and analyze it, and then you could do a calculation and say, okay, if you installed it, here's the upfront costs, here's the return, over 10, 15 years, the payback period, and kind of the investments. So talk me a little bit. So if somebody were to contact you, so solarguy.com or Power by Sun or Energy Conservation Source, what are the first steps they would take with you on both residential and commercial?
That's exactly right. A single bill, since most of them give like a 12-month summary.
Yeah.
That's useful, because what we really need to know up front is what's your consumption and what are you paying, and then also the bill gives your address. So we all have tools that, the first thing it starts with is a satellite image based on address, and then we can kind of take a look at what the site will support, and we can do a preliminary without leaving the office.
Wow, fascinating. So Nick, any thoughts on, and then commercial too, right? What are the steps? Is it pretty much the same?
Pretty much the same, yeah. And again, you want to keep a lot of these utilities, at least around here, like the local utility is Grand Haven Power and Light. They have a threshold. If you stay below that threshold and design your system, you're paying yourself 100% of the power, whatever it may be. Whereas if you exceed that threshold of amount of power, then the utility will charge at a higher level. So you don't want to make a big photovoltaic system exceed your limit of whatever it is and pay it back to them, because they're going to just give you avoided costs. So you want to, so the solar system, no matter how big or small, it helps you stay under that limit where the price goes up. Here it's about 600 kilowatts per month. If you through solar or energy efficiency keep it below that number, your rates are X. If you exceed that number, then your your rate is X plus 20%, 30%, whatever it is.
So
they don't want you to use them.
So if you design a system and you make over that limit, some of it goes back onto the grid, but they're you're gonna pay more, increase your rate.
They'll pay you avoided costs, which is peanuts.
Oh, gotcha. Is that the same thing in Indiana, Chris, or?
It is utility independent right now, or utility dependent right now.
Dependent. Okay, but there is something like that. There's limits at each.
In a couple of years, all utilities will be doing the same thing.
Right.
Gotcha. So you want to design your system not to get over that limit. So
right.
Yep.
And again, playing to the solar availability of fuel in the summertime, a lot of these houses most of them are air conditioned, and a lot of them are dehumidified. Either if they don't have the air conditioning, they have a dehumidifier, and that's why so much of the bills are more expensive in the summertime. The lighting in the wintertime is now pretty much compensated by the LEDs and the highly efficient lighting. And most of the heat in Michigan is gas powered. The only trouble you get if that's natural gas lines, you get into trouble with propane, can be quite expensive, and you might want to augment some of your heating with electric heating via solar. But usually most of the heating is done with gas lines.
Wow. Okay. Interesting stuff. All right. So we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to end with an interesting question. But I'm going to give a shout out to Peter, who I think is watching. And comment in, Peter, if you got any questions for Nick. So give him a tough one.
If I screw up on the business case, don't forget, doctors are stupid business people. All right. So
so Chris and Nick, I'm going to save this for the next one. I'm going to do search Indeed, but I believe one of the top jobs in the next century based on LinkedIn or Indeed was for solar type solar people, solar engineers, solar installers. I think that's one of the top growing jobs, right? So I don't know if you've experienced or seen any shortage of installers, and then if so, some of our audience members may be interested in getting into solar, engineering or solar installation. So how would they go into that? So I think, Chris, you said there may be some schools, some programs for learning about installation. I think maybe in West Lafayette you were saying, but where would you go? How would somebody go about getting into the business?
There are all kinds of independent training houses that offer certain programs as well, but I recommend someone goes into something a little structured. Now, Indiana, this is not a commercial for Ivy Tech, Indiana Vocational. But Ivy Tech has campuses throughout the state. They have a program in West Lafayette that is their first one, and it's been around for several years. That is a renewable energy program. And they graduate students with associate's degrees, and they can leave with either a PV solar technician or the credentials to work as wind techs on wind farms and travel the Midwest doing that work. So that's a really good thing. It covers a lot of the basics, but also code and safety. They focus an awful lot on code and safety, which is, we're putting a potential fire source on people's roofs or businesses. So that's
apparently
big.
Elon Musk wasn't aware of that with his problems with Walmart.
But we won't mention that.
Interesting. So potential, a high, potential fire source. You want qualified technicians. You want people who are trained in the right. You want people you can trust. Also, a big investment on people's part. I think, Nick, we had talked about, there's the roofing. It's potentially at the same time. So when you are looking at a new roof for residential,
absolutely, that's the perfect time, right?
Yep. So instead
Matter of
of
fact, we just did an 8 kilowatt system, 8 or 9 kilowatt system in Holland, Michigan. It was a friend of mine, and he was putting a new roof on at the same time, and he loved the numbers.
Yeah. So that's interesting because if you don't want to wait and do it at separate times, if you
right.
Sure. You got a new roof coming on, it's like, why not contact somebody? And then Nick, any tips on, you've spent years studying this, and any good resources, any training programs that you would recommend?
I've always been impressed with Ivy Tech. Way back when I got involved with an energy school here in the Grand Rapids area, Jordan College, they have since disappeared. So I got involved with the solar electric car races that General Motors sponsored. And Ivy Tech, I was always impressed with them. They always showed up for the game, and they always did very well. And always impressed with their understanding of not only electric mobility, but of photovoltaics. Yep. No, they've got it figured out pretty well from what I've seen. Yeah. The other issue, it's a caveat, on the marina side, if you have a bunch of sailors in that particular marina, now you're going outside of the financial arena, all right? The stink boaters, they don't care about anything. They as far as the environmental issue. Yeah. They're stink boaters, by definition, they're stink boaters. The sailors, conversely, they see solar cells on their potential putting their boat in this marina. They have died and went to heaven because, again, it's a natural source that because there's always the sailors are always versus the stink boaters. They both don't respect each other too much.
No, it's a natural market segment that
absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Kind of like so I'll end it with this: is I've been studying the market. As you know, I've been studying market social media channels and what different companies use. And one of the I think Peter was the one that clued me into, well, let's look at Australia, because they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of solar installation, right? And we looked at 2 big commercial companies over in Australia, and they had almost 100% on LinkedIn and given up on Facebook, right? Their marketing strategy. And it was just so clear in the data that that's what they were doing because they were focused on this. And then, Chris, we had noticed, I think, looking stateside, there was one company in particular that was very residential focused, and they had, I think the number was 200 and hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook, which is the other side of the spectrum. That was for residential. So I never imagined that I would see that type of segmentation in social media and how people get their messaging out. But that was night and day once I started looking at the data, right? Which is fascinating to see. And what you just said too, if you're a sailor, you're more likely. So that's another segmentation. There's another niche, and so this has been a fascinating. We're a little bit over the 1 hour mark. Fascinating journey. I would love to get you guys back again, and maybe we can, Nick. Maybe we can work on Peter.
Yeah, we'll work.
Get him on this video. So if you guys can hang on for a second, I'm going to end the broadcast, and then we'll have a little chat. So
Okay.
Yep. Hang on. Here we go.